Hello and welcome to episode number 235. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. This is part 2 of our interview with David Blumhorst, in which we discuss that combining Agile and project portfolio management is not really that much different than if you used traditional project management approaches. If you remember, in part 1 we discussed that there are 4 exceptions you need to be aware of when integrating Agile with portfolio management, and then we looked at how you need to adjust your PPM framework to include 5 standard metrics for Agile. We looked at the first 2. They were scheduled finish date and % complete. Here in part 2, we'll move into the other 3 metrics, and then David and I open up the white paper from Adaptive and look at the graphical representation that clearly shows how straightforward integrating Agile and PPM can be. And by the way, a link to download the white paper is on our website, so you may want to grab it from there and have it at the ready as you listen to this so you can actually see the graphic. And now, class, take out your blenders and let's all mix Agile and PPM. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with David Blumhorst, Vice President of Solutions and Services at Adaptive.
Third metric, scope changes.
Scope is much more fun in Agile.
Yeah, because it changes constantly.
Because it changes constantly. Traditional is meant to be we've got a plan in place, we're delivering in 8 months. Boy, if you change your mind on anything, that's going to change your date, it's going to change your budget. We got problems here, and you're going to fill out this lengthy form called a scope change request, and it's going to go in front of the steering committee, it's going to get funded, and in a month, hopefully we'll have that scope change approved, and we move forward. In Agile, your scope is the total story points of all the stories in the project. If the customer comes up with something new they want to do, add the story. You have now changed the scope. If you don't have time for it, you might deprioritize something as you go along, but scope changes are simply adding, subtracting, changing stories around, and they flex as you go. Because you are iteratively delivering, say every couple of weeks or every month, it's much easier to take a look at what's coming up, and instead of saying, it's set in stone, we just finished the design, we're halfway through the coding, if you change now, we have to go back and change the design and change this stuff. Instead of saying that, you can say, oh, you know what? In the sprint, 2 sprints out, we should be able to squeeze that in. We'll just move some things around, maybe deprioritize something, or we found that this story was actually going to be less points than we thought anyway. Let's squeeze that in there. Because you're constantly doing a full cycle, if you will, each release of design, test, deploy. You don't have that locked-in spot where you have to freeze everything and say we're going forward from here. So it's easier to put scope changes in. It's easier to adjust for scope. That's one of the whole purposes behind Agile is its flexibility. And like I said, you do that simply by adding stories and deciding if you want to just add to the total stories or deprioritize some stories to keep the scope to the same time frame and total size.
Fourth metric that you mention in the white paper, actual cost versus budget.
Yeah, and every project has a budget and actual cost. When you start a project, you're typically going to fund it. So you'll have done your estimating, whether it's by doing some planning and thinking up what the total story points might be, or in traditional laying out a high-level task plan and figuring out what resources you need, what capital dollars you need, etc. Both Agile and traditional are, here's my project, it has a start, it has a finish, what's it going to take to do it? That's my budget. The actual I'm recording as I go. And I'll be logging expenses, say we bought the hardware, we bought the software licenses, etc. The major expense, of course, in any project is the labor, which is where we differ a little bit. In the traditional project methodology, we'll be logging our time for actuals. and applying a rate to that to come up with the actual labor costs versus the budget. In the Agile, assuming we have a dedicated team, we don't need to, have them log their time for that. If they're a dedicated team, we just take their blended rate typically as opposed to actual salary, but take their blended rate, put that against the project, and just rack that up to get the actual cost. In mixed environments where the Agile team isn't really dedicated or you have players that aren't dedicated, they probably will need to log their time again, but it would be just against the Agile project, not against, say, each task in the project, because you're not looking at the tasks in a project in Agile to tell you how you're doing against your estimates. That's a story points calculation. So you could actually log that time simply at the project level to get your actual cost.
And the fifth and final metric you discuss is project health.
Project health is always a fun one.
Red, green, and orange, right?
Red, yellow, green, or in Europe now they like to go with RAG, red, amber, green. RAG, I guess, sounds better. Project health, in my mind, has always been somewhat subjective. There are objective measures we've used, such as in the traditional model, what percent complete are we against what percent complete should we be at this time frame? You can do the same sort of thing with Agile if you want by looking at the story points. What percent complete are we versus what percent complete should we be given the elapsed time of the project? That's a simple way to do it. Most good project health measures, I got to tell you, as a practitioner, I like talking to the project manager, talking to the executive stakeholders, talking to the customers, looking to see if there are any issues that are coming up, and making it a more subjective measure. I know there's a lot out there about making it an objective measure, whether it's based on the percent complete, on earned value, and its metrics. The CPI and SPI. Those are all good objective measures to check with. But I also like to have, if we've got good project managers, or in the case of Agile, a good Scrum Master, or a good product owner in that case, give me your good subjective feel. And in that case, both Agile and traditional are the same. How are things going? Are we going to get there on time? Are we going to get there on budget? And most importantly, to meet a project health. And this is something you can't really measure with those objective standards. Are we going to deliver the business target, the business value we were expecting to deliver? It's something I say about projects over and over again. If we hit the scope right, if we do it on time and we do it on budget, and then at the end of the day, the customer says, yeah, you did all that, but it didn't work for me. It's not what I need. We threw away the time and money. It really didn't work. So health to me, big sense is, are we heading toward the business target we had in mind when we set out on this project and on this journey? In many ways, Agile is better equipped to do that than the traditional waterfall method because it breaks its stories down by business value and business things that can be delivered. If I deliver something early in the project that looks like it's not quite working out, we then still have time to adjust because we're not doing this big bang at the end. So it's easier to adjust if we see health slipping. It's easier to adjust if we think the business value isn't coming through the way we need it to than it is in a traditional. But still, the project health to me is more of a subjective call, even though we might have some objective measures behind it.
Let me throw something out there, because when I originally read about these 5 metrics in the white paper, and now especially after listening to you, I got the feeling, and it's been confirmed, there's no difference. The metrics are the same. All we have to do is we have to figure out a way of how do we get these metrics so that when an executive looks into our portfolio, they can get sort of visibility into the project. They want percent complete. They want to know about scheduled finish date. They want to know about actual cost versus budget. We know how to do it in traditional very well because we've been doing it for years and years and years. And now in Agile, well, there are just different ways of approaching it and different ways of figuring out what is the metric here. Is that impression correct?
That's exactly right. So you've got, as you see here with these 5 metrics, the same 5 metrics you would see in many traditional waterfall projects. Mm-hmm. The only difference in Agile is how you calculate them, but you still get to the same thing.
All right, perfect. Now, we've talked a little bit about that white paper. We said it is from Daptive. You work for Daptive.
Correct.
Your company, you're a big player in portfolio management. How does Daptive solve all of these problems that we've talked about, integrating agile and traditional methods into portfolio management? Take a couple of minutes here. Talk us through. What do you offer?
So we have a couple of things we offer. Obviously, we're a PPM tool at heart. So we've got all the portfolio management capabilities that means. If you think about portfolio management, break it down into 3 slices. Start with portfolio planning, and then portfolio execution and monitoring, and portfolio benefits, if you will, harvesting the benefits. If you think of a life cycle like that, portfolio planning is all about deciding what projects to do. Doing the right things as opposed to doing them right. The portfolio planning process stays the same whether you're agile or traditional. You're looking at, say, at PeopleSoft, we would get 120 project requests in a quarter, could execute on maybe 20 of those. I don't care how we're executing those 20. We're up, PMBOK, Agile, doesn't matter. What I've got 120, I've got to wean it down to 20. And I need a method for doing that. So that project intake cycle, the demand management, if you will, is a key piece of portfolio management that we support very strongly in Daptive. And have some nice out-of-the-box stuff in there in Daptive as well. But you're going to do that whether you're agile or traditional. You get to portfolio monitoring, and now you're executing your projects. You might be executing traditional waterfall projects, and we have great tools for doing that in Daptive. You might be executing agile projects. For executing agile projects, we work with several of the key tools today, Rally being one of those that we've done integrations with already. And we take those metrics we talked about, story points and stories and things like that, and we import those through our Daptive Connect integration into Daptive so that we can then calculate those metrics we talked about and put them into the portfolio right alongside traditional projects that are also calculating those metrics. So you'll see a portfolio report that lists, say, 50 projects and gives you your scheduled finish, your percent complete, your health, your actual cost, your budget, all those things, and they all line up right with each other as if they were all the same. To the executive, you can't really tell they're being executed differently. You're seeing the same thing. And so they get that nice one source view of the portfolio. And then on the benefit side, again, you're beyond execution. So the agile part is over now. Though with agile, you're probably collecting this earlier. You start collecting benefits into an application we have for collecting those benefits to make sure you're getting the business benefits you wanted, whether it was an ROI benefit or an increased revenue or increased customer satisfaction that you posited in your business case at the beginning. Is that what actually happened afterwards? And so you record that. So if you think about it, Agile becomes an execution method inside of the broader portfolio management framework. We're supporting that broader portfolio management framework, have come up with a nice way to integrate Agile into that and give the same insight into Agile projects that you get into traditional projects. That's on the integration side. We've also been developing ways to run Agile projects inside of Daptive itself, whether it's Scrum or Kanban, which is one that my team has been using. I have a team of folks that actually develop some of the out-of-the-box functionality that goes on top of the core Daptive platform. And we do that using a Kanban approach that we do execute in Daptive itself, and then can come up with those same metrics to see how we're doing. So that's the broad picture of how you take Agile, integrate it into portfolio management, and why that works in Daptive so well.
All right. Very good segue here, because in the white paper, there is a section where you talk and you show how such a framework actually works. And for those of you at home who happen to have that white paper, open it maybe up on that graphic, because I'd like you to take us through that graphic. If you wouldn't mind, David, and talk to us a little bit about how we ensure how everything fits together there into that framework when we integrate Agile.
Sure. So let's start at the top left if we're looking at the flow there, where we start with business strategy and objectives. Now, this is, as I said before, that we're in the portfolio planning section, typical PPM type of process here. We start with what's the business about? What are we trying to accomplish this year? Let's take a look at, say, when I was at Clarent and we were redoing the IT architecture, it was because we were expanding globally. So the business strategy was we're expanding globally. We have objectives to open up our sales areas in EMEA and in Asia. How are we going to accomplish those objectives? When you take a look at a business that way, then you take a look at all the active work on your plate, what projects are on our plate now, what requests and what ideas are coming in to help serve those objectives, and you put them through a filter essentially that says, are these projects ones that are going to help drive the company forward based on that strategy and objectives? You take all those requests, you pass them through what's shown as decision criteria. That is often done with a steering committee in a number of companies. Could be a couple of managers, but it's often a steering committee to say, now that we see the strategy and objectives, now that we see all the proposed work, which ones do we think are worth doing? At PeopleSoft, again, if we had 120 of those, we'd say, okay, let's say evaluate 30 or 40 of them. They'll pass through that first filter. We have some proposed projects. We now take those and look at it against resource capacity, both the dollars we have available for capital projects or OpEx projects, depending on what you're looking at this year, and the people we have available. Typically, the people are sliced out initially by here's all the active work they're doing and the non-project work they're doing, what's left. Let's see what kind of capacity we have there, match that against the demand, and then narrow down the projects one more time based on trying to fit the demand into the supply. And sometimes we increase the supply, of course. If we say we really need to do these, let's go do some staff augmentation, what have you, to make sure we can get it done. What comes out of that evaluation then is the funded projects. Here's the ones we're putting money against. Let's get going. Let's start these projects up so we can analyze, get requirements, design, all that kind of stuff. Here's now where you split out to different methodologies. On the chart, we show traditional and agile projects in parallel there, which is great. I could put several other methodologies in parallel in the execution mode as well. RUP being another favorite, critical chain, whatever you want to put in there. But in this chart, let's concentrate on traditional and agile. In traditional, you're going to go through the planning, the executing phases. You're going to plan, you're going to execute, you're going to deploy, basically. There's some controlling artifacts going on while you do that. In Agile, it's more you're doing sprints and releases, iteration, 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 if you're doing Scrum. If you're doing Kanban, you're probably still doing releases. You might be doing Kanban within sprints and releases, something called Scrumban. But in any event, you've got these monthly releases going, every other week release, whatever your schedule is. And you're essentially inside of each iteration doing a small plan and execute. You're doing a small design, build, test, deploy, if you will, inside of each of those, just collaboratively in teams. But that's where they kind of split out and take parallel paths, where you still then want to put out of those parallel paths what the portfolio health is, how are we doing on hitting those business targets, as I said before, and often you want to surface the projects that aren't performing right, what we call exception management. So I'll get a list on my desk of 50 projects. I'll sort it by those red, yellow, green colors and get the reds and yellows at the top so I can focus on them and hopefully address the issues in there, which actually gives me a moment to get on a little soapbox about red, yellow, and green. There are a lot of project managers that like to see all their projects green. When I was running PMOs, I did not like that. Anytime I saw someone with 5 or 6 projects and they were all green, I didn't believe them because I know better. Projects hit issues. There will be some yellow and reds. You want to encourage your project managers to report issues because if they surface it, you can then address them and get projects back on track. That's true whether it's traditional or agile. You want to know if there's something going on to pay attention to. That's what exception management's all about. Exception management isn't about let's surface the exceptions so that executives can go beat on somebody and tell them how bad a job they're doing. That's not what we like to do as executives. It's about let's find out where things aren't going quite right so we can help you, so we can help get this back on track because we all want to deliver the business value at the end. So some of the actions we take out of seeing that, we might need to move resources around to higher priority work. We might need to get rid of the completed projects. We might have to kill some projects. And I've had to kill projects just because the business case changed and we weren't going to get the value out of it. Project was running fine. Business circumstances changed. So we have some actions we take based on those exceptions. And then, of course, since there are active projects constantly going on, it feeds back into the loop where we're regularly looking at what's the next set of new work coming in, how does that stack up against the current work we're doing, and we start the process all over again.
Yep, and I think with that we have come full circle all the way back to Elizabeth Herron's question. How can portfolio management, which takes a long-term strategic view based on outcomes, fit with agile methods, which are typically time-boxed over short periods and focused on outputs? I think the answer is quite simple. There is no real change to portfolio management. Agile is simply a project management approach that you use to execute the projects that you have determined are valuable to the business. And then on the Agile projects, you have to be able to calculate the metrics, the agreed upon metrics that are standard across project methodologies. You have to calculate those and be able to feed them back into your portfolio system. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. And the beauty of it is you don't even need to do anything different in your Agile teams in order to get those metrics to blend it into the portfolio.
Lovely. We had another question from I believe gentleman on Facebook, Gokila Ganesan. What is the next level of Agile?
Yeah, so we keep thinking about how we develop not just software, but how we do work inside of IT, if you will, and inside of other project-driven organizations. Now, Agile has given us an approach that is less waterfallish, less, we have to get this done by requirements done by X date, design done by X date, and allows us to iterate. As we iterate with Agile, we start not only having that we can get things done in monthly timeframes, we actually start taking some longer views as well, contrary to one of the other questions, because we can keep an Agile cycle going for a long time. So if you think about that, you start changing the nature of project work itself, maybe away from pure projects that have a start and an end date to more cyclical processes. So for instance, at PeopleSoft, we did monthly releases inside IT of how we deployed PeopleSoft financials inside of PeopleSoft. That was an ongoing monthly type of release, and we kind of got out of the project world of we're going to do big projects against our internal implementation of PeopleSoft. Now and then something big came up, we had to do that. So it becomes more ongoing. And so you start getting out of the whole project mentality necessarily. The other thing that's happening with Agile today, Agile has been almost synonymous the last couple of years with Scrum. When I hear someone in IT say Agile, they tend to mean sprints and releases. We're going to do stories. We're going to put them into 2-week sprints. We're going to do monthly releases. That's Agile. Agile is really an approach. It's a philosophy, if you will, of how you develop and execute software. And it has a lot to do, as I said at the beginning, with collaborating with your customers, be they internal business stakeholders or external customers, focusing on developing software, what have you. More popular now, we're seeing a lot of move toward Kanban, which is a different type of Agile method. So we've gone from extreme programming to Scrum, now to Kanban. Kanban is a set of queues where instead of doing a bunch of sprints and releases, you say, for any given story, we need to take it through these steps. And perhaps it's elaborate the story, do the development work, test it, deploy it, and move on to the next one. So Kanban actually becomes more of a continuous delivery model instead of a sprint-based delivery model. You might still bundle up what comes out of Kanban into releases you actually put out of the software to the internal organization or to your customers. But you're constantly delivering these stories as they go through their steps instead of breaking it into sprints. It's based on the Toyota motor production process from a while ago called Kanban. It's been adapted for software development. And you can actually use Kanban to do things other than software. So I'm seeing a lot of move toward Kanban right now. I kind of like it. Like I said, in our solution staff, we're using Kanban. It actually works a little better with non-dedicated teams because you're not in those time box sprints. You can pick a piece up and move it down the queues. So I'm seeing some movement toward there. And for the future, there's always ways to do this stuff, this work of whether it's delivering software or putting in infrastructure or creating websites. There's always better and better ways to do this stuff. And I like nothing more than to noodle with what are better and better ways to do this stuff. So I think Agile itself will continue to evolve. It's meant to evolve. If you read the Agile Manifesto, that's what it's all about. It's not meant to stay still. And so I think we'll keep seeing Agile progress into newer and newer ways of doing this.
Very well. To close out our interview, I always like to give some hands-on advice here. So what are your top 3 recommendations for Agile practitioners out there who need to combine and integrate Agile projects into their current project portfolio management framework?
Yeah, and I guess we've covered a bunch of that, so we want to just consolidate it down to a few quick things. For Agile practitioners currently running Agile type delivery projects, I think the first thing they need to do is realize that they need to be able to report out progress and metrics to their stakeholders. I've seen just too much of it'll get done when it gets done. I have seen Agile used inappropriately, almost as an excuse not to plan. It's not. Agile's not an excuse not to plan. If you look at the structure of Scrum or the structure of Kanban, there are very specific things you do. If you're doing them, you can take those metrics and boil them up into what you need for a portfolio. So start there, take whatever method you're using and get these metrics out of them so you can put them into a portfolio. A second recommendation would be to make sure that when you're doing Agile, the interesting thing about Agile is even if you do themes and epics and stories, sometimes you're going through the stories and working the project, you can start to lose the perspective of why are we doing this overall effort in the first place. I recommend this to traditional teams too. If you're in a project that is using an Agile method, have an elevator pitch somewhere for why you're doing that project that you always keep in front of you. Here's what we're trying to do for the company. We're trying to add $2 billion in revenue through a new e-commerce platform. That's a quick one. We're trying to deliver the mobile app for our customers, one we did at Adaptive. We're trying to get EMEA set up with new offices. So there's usually a quick, less than 30-second elevator pitch for why you're doing a project. Make sure you've got that almost like a mantra, because that's what you're really aiming for long term. And like I said, in Agile, you can get kind of lost in the stories as the weeds, if you will. And third thing is to recognize where Agile plugs into the whole process. Agile itself is not the portfolio process. It's how we go about executing. There's a lot of decisions being made before we even start an Agile project about what work to do, what work to fund, and start realizing where Agile plugs into the totality of project portfolio management. And I think when you understand that, you'll have a much better understanding of how your Agile projects fit into the PPM space.
David, thank you very much for having been on the program today. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that was the conclusion of our interview with David Blumhorst from Adaptive on Agile and portfolio management. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMI ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the Agile Prepcast. And study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam video training from agileprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. I have a project, therefore I am. Until next time.